The Alcott Mansion was a monument to opulence in the heart of Kensington Gardens, London. With its impeccable gardens and imposing facade, it symbolized the business empire of Bernard Alcott, one of the country's most respected entrepreneurs in the renewable energy sector. Despite all its grandeur, for Mrs. Josephine Rhodes, that house represented much more than just her workplace of the past 5 years. Josephine, a 50-year-old woman from Alabama, carried on her face, marked by the southern sun, the determination of someone who had come to the capital city in search of a better life. Her grey hair, always tied in a discreet bun, revealed the discipline with which she led her life and work. With her honesty and dedication, she had earned not only the position of housekeeper at the mansion, but also the absolute trust of her employer. Josephine is like a pillar of this house, Bernard used to tell friends who attended his dinners. Without her, this place would crumble in a matter of days. For young Raphael, Bernard's only son from his first marriage, Josephine was much more than an employee. Since his mother's sudden departure, when he was just 4 years old, the housekeeper had become his confidant, his storyteller, and the person who wiped away his tears when the weight of his mother's absence became unbearable. "Aunt Jo, tell me another story from the South." Raphael would ask almost every night after Bernard retired to his study to work until late hours. That peaceful routine, however, began to unravel one autumn morning when Bernard announced during breakfast, "Raphael, Josephine, I have important news. Vanessa and I have decided to get married next month." The silence that followed was broken only by the clinking of the spoon Raphael dropped onto his porcelain plate. Josephine maintained her serene demeanor, but her eyes revealed the apprehension she immediately felt. Vanessa Miller, a beautiful 35-year-old woman, 15 years Bernard's junior, had entered the Alcotts' lives less than 6 months earlier. They met at a charity event where she represented an environmental protection NGO. With her stunning beauty, sharp intelligence, and a calculatedly warm smile, it didn't take long for Bernard to fall under her spell. "I'm very happy for you, Mr. Alcott," Josephine said, holding the silver tray firmly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Raphael, however, couldn't hide his discomfort. At 7 years old, the boy already showed a keen perception for someone so young. "Is she going to live here? In my mom's house?" he asked with a choked voice. "Raphael, we've talked about this," Bernard replied firmly, but without being able to completely hide his discomfort. "This is our home now, and Vanessa will be part of our family." In the week following the announcement, Vanessa began visiting the mansion more frequently, always bringing expensive gifts for Raphael, who received them politely but without enthusiasm. For Josephine, she reserved cold smiles and instructions on how she preferred the house to be organized when she became the new Mrs. Alcott. "Mrs. Rhodes, I believe this flower arrangement in the entrance hall is a bit outdated, don't you think? Bernard told me you've been taking care of it for years, but perhaps it's time to refresh the house's style," Vanessa commented one day, as she slid her perfectly manicured fingers over the Italian marble console. "As you prefer, ma'am," Josephine replied, maintaining the respectful posture that had always characterized her. The wedding took place in a luxurious ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral, followed by a reception for 500 guests in the mansion's gardens. While the guests celebrated, Josephine found Raphael hiding in the library, his favorite refuge. "Aunt Jo, she doesn't like me," the boy confessed, huddled among the shelves of antique books. "Don't say that." "My little one," Josephine comforted, sitting beside him. "She just needs time to get to know that beautiful little heart you have." "No, I saw how she looks at me when Dad isn't watching. It's the same look Max gives when he sees a cat in the garden." Josephine couldn't help but smile at the comparison to the family's Labrador, but her heart ached. Raphael's childish intuition unfortunately seemed accurate. In the weeks following the wedding, the atmosphere in the mansion changed drastically. Vanessa quickly took control of the house, reorganizing the staff, redecorating entire rooms, and establishing new rules. Bernard, blinded by his new wife's charm, seemed not to notice the growing discomfort among the staff, nor his son's increasing isolation. "From now on, family meals will be for family only," Vanessa announced during a dinner. "Raphael, that means Mrs. Rhodes will no longer dine with you in your room." It's time we learned to be a real family. The pleading look Raphael gave his father was ignored. Bernard merely nodded, agreeing with his wife as he poured more wine into her crystal glass. For Josephine, the signs that something wasn't right began to accumulate. In addition to Vanessa's changing behavior towards the staff, she started noticing strange activities in the mansion. Locked doors at unusual hours, whispered phone calls late at night, and, more intriguingly, frequent visits to Bernard's study when he was traveling. The study was considered Bernard's private sanctuary. Located on the top floor of the mansion, it was where he kept not only important business documents, but also a wall-mounted safe protected by an original painting. Even Josephine, with all the trust Bernard placed in her, had never entered that room unescorted. On a particularly rainy June night, as she performed her last round of the house before retiring to her room at the back of the property, Josephine heard a metallic clink coming from the corridor leading to the study. Approaching silently, she saw Vanessa's elegant silhouette emerging from the study, carrying a small golden purse. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Josephine noticed something that deeply disturbed her. There was no surprise in Vanessa's gaze, just a cold, calculating gleam. "Good evening." "Josephine," Vanessa said with unsettling calm, "is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Forgive me, ma'am," Josephine replied, lowering her eyes. "I'm just checking if all the lights are off before I retire." "Always so dedicated," Vanessa commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Bernard is very lucky to have such a loyal employee." As Vanessa walked away down the corridor, Josephine remained motionless, an uneasy feeling growing in her chest. Something wasn't right, and she feared discovering what it was. 3 days later, the storm Josephine had sensed finally broke over the Alcott mansion. It was a Sunday morning when Bernard burst into the living room, his face contorted with fury, crumpled documents in his hands. $5 million, he shouted, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. $5 million have disappeared from the safe, along with confidential documents about the merger with Pine Grove Energy Solutions. Vanessa, who had been calmly flipping through a decoration magazine, rose alarmed, with an expression of shock so perfect it could convince anyone. "My God, Bernard! How is this possible? Who would have access to your safe?" Raphael, who had been silently playing with his building blocks in a corner of the room, watched the scene with wide eyes. Josephine, who had just entered with a coffee tray, felt her body go cold as she noticed the calculating look Vanessa cast her way. "Bernard, darling, I don't want to imply anything, but—" Vanessa approached him, delicately placing her hand on his shoulder. "Don't you think it's strange that only a few people have access to your study?" Josephine felt her legs weaken as she placed the tray on the side table. The silence in the room became increasingly suffocating. "What exactly are you suggesting, Vanessa?" Bernard asked, his gaze oscillating between his wife and the housekeeper. "Well, you've always trusted your employees blindly, especially—" Vanessa paused calculatedly, her eyes turning to Josephine. "Perhaps it's time we checked everyone's quarters, wouldn't you say?" "You can't be suggesting that I—" Josephine couldn't finish the sentence. Such was the indignation she felt. "I'm not accusing anyone, Mrs. Rhodes. I'm just suggesting a preventive measure," Vanessa replied with false sweetness. "After all, if there's nothing to hide, there's no reason to worry, right?" Raphael, who had been watching everything intently, stood up and approached Josephine, holding her trembling hand. The boy's gesture of trust brought tears to the housekeeper's eyes. "Dad, Aunt Jo would never do anything like that," Raphael said with a conviction that surprised everyone in the room. "She takes care of us. She takes care of me when you're traveling." Bernard ran a hand through his gray hair, visibly disturbed by the situation. On one hand, he trusted Josephine as he trusted few in his life. On the other, Vanessa's suggestion planted a seed of doubt that was beginning to germinate. "Let's resolve this civilly," he finally decided. "Mark!" he called for the mansion's security guard. The burly man appeared promptly at the living room door. "Sir, please accompany Mrs. Rhodes to her quarters and conduct a search, and call the police." The words fell like blades upon Josephine. In her 5 years of dedicated service, she had never imagined undergoing such humiliation. With dignity, however, she raised her chin and followed the security guard, Feeling Raphael's gaze fixed on her back and, even more disturbing, the almost imperceptible smile on Vanessa's lips. Her small room at the back of the mansion was simple but impeccably organized. On the wooden dresser, framed photos showed her family in Alabama, elderly parents, smiling nephews, and the simple house where she grew up. A well-worn Bible rested beside the meticulously made bed. Mark conducted the search with evident discomfort, apologizing several times as he rummaged through drawers and the wardrobe. Josephine remained seated on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap, praying silently. The security guard's muffled cry brought her back to reality. "Mrs. Rhodes," he murmured, his face pale as he pulled a black bag from behind the wardrobe. Opening it, he revealed several stacks of cash, carefully piled and sealed with the same band used in Bernard's safe. $100,000, with Mr. Alcott's seal. "That's not mine," Josephine exclaimed, jumping up. "Mark, you've known me for years. You know I would never—" The words died in her throat as Bernard and Vanessa appeared at the door, followed by the two police officers who had just arrived. The look of disappointment on Bernard's face was like a stab to her heart. "Josephine," he began, his voice choked. "How could you?" "Mr. Alcott, I swear on my mother's memory I didn't take that money. I've never seen that bag in my life." Tears now streamed freely down the housekeeper's wrinkled face. "The bag was hidden behind the wardrobe, sir," Mark informed, avoiding looking directly at Josephine. "And the money has your seal." One of the police officers approached, taking handcuffs from his belt. "Mrs. Josephine Rhodes, you are under arrest on suspicion of theft. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the words were lost in the whirlwind of thoughts that flooded Josephine's mind. How could she prove her innocence? Who had put that money in her room? The answer seemed obvious, but without proof, it was just her word against Vanessa's, the beloved wife of her employer. "Daddy, no!" Raphael's desperate cry cut through the air. The boy had escaped the nanny's supervision and now lunged towards Josephine, hugging her around the waist with all the strength his small arms allowed. Aunt Jo didn't do anything wrong. It was her, it was Vanessa. A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Vanessa paled momentarily before regaining her composure. "Raphael, darling," she said in a honeyed voice, approaching her stepson. "I know you love Mrs. Rhodes, but you're confused. The adults are sorting this out, okay?" "I'm not confused," Raphael cried, clinging even tighter to the housekeeper. "I saw you and Dad study that night. I saw you taking things from the safe." Bernard looked at his son, astonished, then at his wife, who maintained a nervous smile on her lips. "Raphael is obviously upset," Vanessa stated, addressing the police officers. "He and Josephine have always been very close. It's natural for him to try to protect her, even if he has to make up stories to do so." "I'm not making it up," Raphael insisted, his eyes welling up. "Daddy, please believe me." Bernard knelt before his son, placing his hands on his shoulders. "Raphael, I know you're confused and scared. We'll talk about this later, okay? Now I need you to go with Vera to your room." The nanny, who had just arrived, breathless after searching for the boy throughout the mansion, extended her hand to Raphael. The boy, however, refused to leave Josephine's side. "If you take Aunt Jo, I'm going with her," he declared with surprising determination for his age. One of the police officers, moved by the scene, gently intervened. "Mr. Alcott, if I may, perhaps it would be better to resolve this more calmly. We can take Mrs. Rhodes for questioning without the need for handcuffs given the circumstances." Bernard nodded, visibly shaken by his son's reaction. "Yes, I think that's better. And I want to accompany them to the police station. I need to understand exactly what's happening." "Bernard," Vanessa exclaimed, indignant. "You can't be considering that." "Please, Vanessa," he interrupted firmly. "There's something very strange about this situation. I've known Josephine for 5 years, and she's never given me reason to doubt her honesty. And now my son is making a serious accusation against you. I need to hear all sides of this story." As she was led out of the mansion, Josephine felt a mixture of despair and a tenuous thread of hope. Raphael's conviction in her innocence might be the only light in the midst of that nightmare. However, how could a 7-year-old boy prove anything against a cunning woman like Vanessa? At the Kensington Gardens police station, Detective Charles Meadows, a middle-aged man with a serious expression and shrewd eyes, listened attentively to the police officer's account of what had happened at the Alcott mansion. Let me see if I understand, he said, adjusting his glasses on his nose. A trusted employee with no criminal record suddenly decides to steal $5 million from her employer, but hides only $100,000 in her own room, leaving the bag easily discoverable behind the wardrobe. The police officers exchange glances, uncomfortable with the detective's skeptical tone. Yes, detective. The rest of the money and the documents mentioned by Mr. Alcott were not found. The detective scratched his chin, thoughtful. And the boy, Mr. Alcott's son, accuses his stepmother of committing the theft? Yes, sir, the younger officer replied. He seemed quite convinced, although Mrs. Alcott suggested he was just trying to protect the employee with whom he is very close. Bring the suspect to my office, the detective ordered, and inform Mr. Alcott that I'd like to speak with him and the boy separately. While waiting in the small interrogation room, Josephine tried to organize her thoughts. How could she prove her innocence? Who would believe the word of a housekeeper from Alabama against the elegant wife of a powerful businessman? Mrs. Rhodes, the detective called as he entered the room. I'm Detective Charles Meadows. I'd like to hear your version of the facts. With a trembling but firm voice, Josephine recounted her 5 years of work at the mansion, Vanessa's arrival, the changes in the house's atmosphere, and finally, the strange episode in which she had caught the new Mrs. Alcott leaving the study late at night with a golden purse. The detective listened attentively, making occasional notes. When she finished, he observed her for a few moments in silence. Mrs. Rhodes, I understand your situation, but I need to be frank. Without concrete evidence, it will be difficult to refute the evidence found in your room. I know, Detective, Josephine replied, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. But I swear on all that is sacred, I didn't take that money. I would never betray Mr. Bernard's trust. Are there security cameras in the mansion? Yes, sir. In several areas, including the corridor leading to the study. A flicker of interest appeared in the detective's eyes. That could be useful. I'll request the recordings immediately. When the detective left, Josephine closed her eyes and prayed. For the first time since that nightmare began, she felt that someone other than Raphael was willing to consider her innocence. In the police station waiting room, Raphael refused to let go of his father's hand. His eyes, red from crying, wandered restlessly around the unfamiliar environment. Bernard, in turn, seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few hours. The idea that his wife could be truly responsible for the disappearance of the money was disturbing. But the possibility of having unjustly condemned Josephine, the woman who had practically raised his son after his ex-wife's departure, was equally agonizing. Raphael, he called softly, kneeling to be at his son's height. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw that night. It's very important, son. The truth is always the right path, even when it's difficult. The boy wiped his tears with the back of his hand and took a deep breath. As Josephine had taught him to do when he was nervous, I couldn't sleep. Dad, I had a nightmare and went to look for you. But you were traveling to New York City, remember? Bernard nodded, remembering the business trip the week before. I went to look for Aunt Jo, but she wasn't in her room. Then I heard a noise coming from your study. And what did you do? Bernard asked, feeling his heart race. I went there. The door was ajar and I saw Vanessa. He hesitated before saying his stepmother's name, as if the sound itself caused him discomfort. She was opening the safe behind the painting. She knew the code, Dad, Bernard frowned. He had never shared the safe combination with Vanessa. How could she know? She took out a lot of papers and packets of money and put them in a golden purse, one of those she always uses, Raphael continued. Then she picked up a smaller packet and said something on the phone like, I already have enough to incriminate the housekeeper. Bernard's blood ran cold. The description was too detailed to be a childish invention. Are you absolutely sure about this, Raphael? It's a very serious accusation. I am, Dad, the boy replied with surprising firmness. Then I got scared and ran back to my room. The next day I saw her going into Aunt Jo's room when she thought no one was watching. At that moment, the waiting room door opened and Detective Meadows entered. Greeting Bernard with a handshake, Mr. Alcott, I'd like to speak with you and then with your son, if you don't mind. Of course, Detective. Raphael, can you wait here for a bit? Vera is right there, he said, pointing to the nanny waiting in the corner of the room. The boy nodded, reluctantly letting go of his father's hand. In the detective's office, Bernard listened attentively as the officer shared his initial impressions of the case. Mr. Alcott, after speaking with Mrs. Rhodes, I confess I have some doubts about her guilt. You mentioned that you have security cameras in the mansion, correct? Yes, in several areas, including the study corridor. I've requested the recordings, but I'd like to know more about your relationship with the employee and your wife. Bernard sighed deeply, running his hands over his tired face. Josephine has worked for me for 5 years. Since my ex-wife left us, she has practically been a mother to Raphael. I've never had any reason to distrust her. She is an honest, religious, dedicated woman. As for Vanessa, he paused, organizing his thoughts. We've only been married for 2 months. She was charming, intelligent. I thought I could rebuild my life with her. Give Raphael a new mother. Your son seems convinced of your wife's guilt, the detective commented cautiously. Yes, he just told me something disturbing. He said he saw Vanessa opening my safe, whose combination she shouldn't know, and mentioning something about incriminating the housekeeper. The detective raised his eyebrows, noting the information. This considerably changes the situation. I'd like to hear the boy now, if you allow it. While the detective spoke with Raphael in a special child interview room, accompanied by a police psychologist, Bernard waited anxiously in the corridor. His mind was swirling with doubts and regrets. How could he have been so blind? How had he not perceived Vanessa's true intentions? A young officer hurried over to the detective as he left the interview room. Detective Meadows. The mansion's security footage just arrived. But there's a problem, the officer said, clearly disturbed. There seems to be a glitch in the images precisely during the times mentioned by Mrs. Rhodes and young Raphael. The cameras were either turned off or tampered with. The detective frowned, his suspicion growing with each new revelation. That's no coincidence, he murmured. We need a warrant to check Mrs. Alcott's electronic devices and her recent financial movements. Meanwhile, at the Alcott mansion, Vanessa hastily packed some jewelry and documents into a small suitcase. Her plan was unraveling faster than she had anticipated. Bernard's blind trust in that simple housekeeper and the boy's inconvenient loyalty threatened everything she had worked for in recent months. Her phone rang, startling her. On the screen, her accomplice's name flashed menacingly. I'm leaving now, she said in a low voice. There have been complications. The kid saw me that night. That wasn't in the plan, replied the male voice on the other end of the line. The documents about the merger with Pine Grove Energy Solutions are crucial for our investors. Without them and without the money for bribes, the whole scheme collapses. I know that, Vanessa hissed, closing the suitcase with a sharp movement. I'm taking everything with me. We'll meet at the agreed location in an hour. As she hung up the phone, Vanessa didn't notice the small silhouette standing at the bedroom door. Raphael, who had returned to the mansion with his father after the conversation at the police station, watched his stepmother with a mixture of fear and determination. Silently, he activated the voice recorder on the tablet he carried, a birthday gift from his father, exactly as he had seen in the detective movies he loved to watch in secret. Then he slipped away unnoticed, running to his father's study where Bernard was talking on the phone with his lawyer. Dad! Raphael called, rushing into the study. Vanessa is packing her bags. She's going to run away! Bernard hung up the phone immediately, his face showing a mixture of shock and determination. Raphael, stay here. Don't leave this study for anything, he ordered, heading quickly for the door. Wait, Dad, look at this, the boy exclaimed, extending the tablet. I recorded her talking to someone on the phone about the documents and the money. Bernard stopped abruptly, turning to his son with wide eyes. Taking the tablet from Raphael's hands, he played the audio file. Vanessa's voice filled the room, each word consolidating the terrible truth. His wife was a con artist who had betrayed him from the beginning. Raphael, Bernard said. His voice choked with emotion. You just saved Aunt Jo. With the evidence in hand, Bernard immediately called Detective Meadows, who was already on his way to the mansion with a search warrant. Within minutes, police cars surrounded the property, preventing any escape attempt by Vanessa. At the police station, Josephine waited in a simple cell, her hands clasped in silent prayer. The door suddenly opened, revealing Detective Meadows' serious but kind face. Mrs. Rhodes, could you come with me, please? Josephine followed him with a racing heart, fearing and hoping at the same time. In the detective's office, she found Bernard and Raphael waiting. The boy ran to her immediately, hugging her tightly. "Aunt Jo, we proved you're innocent." Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she embraced the little one, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Josephine," Bernard began, visibly moved, "I have no words to express my regret for having doubted you, even for a moment. I hope you can forgive me." "You are not to blame, Mr. Alcott," she replied with the dignity that had always characterized her. "It was all very well planned." The detective then explained that Vanessa had been arrested trying to leave the mansion. The audio recorded by Raphael, along with the documents and part of the money found in her possession, constituted irrefutable proof of her guilt. Furthermore, the detective continued, preliminary investigations revealed that this is not the first time Mrs. Vanessa Miller, or rather Vanessa Coast, her real name, has carried out similar scams. She has already been investigated in similar cases in New York City and Chicago, always targeting successful businessmen. Bernard seemed stunned by the revelation. How could he have been so naive, so blind? "And what about the rest of the money and the documents?" he asked, trying to assimilate the entire situation. "Most of it was recovered in the suitcase she was preparing to take," the detective replied. "The rest was hidden in a secret compartment at the back of your bedroom closet. As for the documents about the merger with Pine Grove Energy Solutions, they were being sold to a competitor. We managed to intercept the transaction in time." Raphael, who had been listening attentively, tugged at Josephine's shirt sleeve. "Aunt Jo, I told you I'd be your lawyer, didn't I?" "I knew you were innocent." Josephine smiled through her tears, caressing the boy's hair. "You were more than my lawyer, my little one. You were my guardian angel." At that moment, the office door opened and a man in a suit entered hurriedly. It was Paul Fisher, the renowned criminal defense lawyer Bernard had hired to defend Josephine. "I seem to have arrived too late for the party," he commented with a smile, observing the atmosphere of relief in the room. "But we still have work to do to ensure Mrs. Rhodes is completely exonerated and receives due compensation for the trauma suffered." "And what about Vanessa?" Bernard asked, his face hardening as he mentioned the name of the wife who had betrayed him. "She is giving her statement," the detective informed. "The accusations are serious: theft, falsification, slander, criminal association. There's no escaping this time." As they left the police station, Raphael held Josephine's and Bernard's hands tightly, as if trying to keep his small family together. The sun was setting on the London skyline, casting an orange glow over the skyscrapers. 2 weeks passed since Vanessa's arrest. The Alcott mansion had regained some of its tranquility, but the emotional scars left by the incident were still fresh. Josephine, despite being completely exonerated, felt uncomfortable circulating through the rooms she once considered her second home. Every compassionate glance from the other staff members, every excessive attempt by Bernard to show that his trust was restored, only increased her sense of displacement. Raphael, on the other hand, seemed to flourish in his new role as family hero, as Mr. Anthony, the doorman, affectionately called him. The boy recounted the story of how he had saved Josephine to anyone willing to listen, occasionally adding fanciful details that made Bernard shake his head with an indulgent smile. "And then I followed the villain down the dark hallway, like a real detective," he animatedly narrated during breakfast, while Josephine served fresh orange juice. "She didn't know I was recording the whole confession." "Raphael, we've talked about not exaggerating the events," Bernard gently admonished, lowering the newspaper he was reading. "What you did was incredible on its own. It doesn't need embellishment." "But, Dad, it makes it more exciting," the boy protested, biting a piece of toast with jam. Josephine observed the scene with a melancholic smile. Despite the apparent normality, she knew that something had broken there, something that might never be fully restored. That night, after putting Raphael to bed, Josephine found Bernard on the terrace, contemplating the illuminated city with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Alcott, may I speak with you?" Bernard turned, surprised, and immediately gestured for her to join him. "Josephine, please, how many times do I have to tell you there's no need for such formality, especially after everything that's happened?" She nodded, but couldn't abandon the habits of a lifetime of service. "Mr. Bernard, I came to inform you that I am leaving my employment." The whiskey glass almost slipped from Bernard's fingers. He placed the drink on the table and stared at Josephine in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "Josephine, if it's because of the incident, we've already talked about it. It was a terrible mistake on my part, and I'm doing everything I can to compensate you. I've increased your salary, offered the best lawyer to clear any record—" "It's not that, sir," she interrupted softly. "I am very grateful for everything you've done, but some things once broken cannot be glued back exactly as they were before." Bernard remained silent, processing her words. Deep down, he knew Josephine was right. Trust, like fine crystal once shattered, never truly returns to its original state. "And what about Raphael?" he finally asked. "He adores you, Josephine." "He'll be devastated." A shimmer of tears appeared in the housekeeper's eyes. This was, without a doubt, the hardest part of her decision. "The boy is strong, sir. Stronger than we imagine. He demonstrated that by defending the truth when everyone doubted." She paused, swallowing hard. "Besides, I won't be going far. I've accepted an offer to work at the municipal daycare in Chinatown. I'll be able to see Raphael whenever you allow it." Bernard nodded slowly, recognizing the resolve in Josephine's eyes. There was no point in trying to dissuade her. "When do you plan to leave?" "At the end of the month, if that's agreeable. It will give time to help train someone to replace me." "Josephine," Bernard gently held the housekeeper's calloused hands. "I want you to know that there will always be a place for you in this house, and I will make sure that Raphael maintains regular contact with you." The next day during breakfast, Bernard and Josephine announced the news to Raphael. As expected, the reaction was explosive. "No," the boy cried, spilling his glass of milk on the table. "Aunt Jo can't leave. She's family." "Raphael, please understand," Bernard tried to explain. "Aunt Jo needs a new beginning just like us. But you'll continue to see each other regularly, won't you, Josephine?" "Of course, my little one," she assured, holding the boy's trembling hands. "I'm going to work in a daycare, taking care of many children, but you will always be special to me. We can meet on weekends, and who knows, you might even visit the daycare and meet my new little friends." Raphael didn't seem convinced, his eyes brimming with tears. "But who will tell me stories before bed? Who will make that chocolate cake that only you know how to make? Who will protect me when Dad is traveling?" The questions hit Josephine like arrows, but she maintained her composure. "Your father will hire another very good person to take care of you, my love. And as for the stories and the cake, well, we can arrange that when we meet. I can even teach you how to make the cake yourself." In the days that followed, Raphael alternated between periods of reluctant acceptance and outbursts of anger or sadness. Bernard, concerned about the emotional impact on his son, briefly considered asking Josephine to reconsider, but knew it would be unfair to her. Meanwhile, Vanessa's case progressed through the judicial system. Bernard's lawyer, Paul Fisher, kept him informed of all developments. The accusations against Vanessa were serious, and the evidence irrefutable. In addition to the theft at the Alcott mansion, investigations revealed connections to other similar scams perpetrated against businessmen in different states. The judge has scheduled the first hearing for next week, Paul informed during a visit to the mansion. "We would like Mrs. Rhodes to attend as a witness if she agrees." "Of course," Bernard replied. "And what about Raphael? Will he need to testify as well?" Paul hesitated, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. "Well, his testimony was crucial to the case, but I understand your concern. He's very young to face a courtroom. However, there's an interesting precedent we could use. Judge Henry Morrison, who is presiding over the case, is known for his sensitivity in cases involving minors. He could allow testimony in a more private setting, with only the essential parties present." Bernard considered the option carefully. He didn't want to subject his son to the trauma of formal testimony, but he also recognized the importance of Raphael's testimony to ensure Vanessa was properly punished. "I'll talk to Raphael. The final decision must be his." That night, after dinner, Bernard sat with his son in the library, the boy's favorite refuge, filled with adventure and mystery books that fueled his imagination. "Raphael, I need to ask you an important question," Bernard began, choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember that Vanessa is going to be judged for what she did to Aunt Jo and to us?" The boy nodded seriously, closing the book he was leafing through. "The judge would very much like to hear your story. Would you be willing to tell what you saw that night?" It would be in a special room, not a crowded courtroom. Raphael remained silent for a few moments, his small face furrowed in an expression of intense concentration that made him seem much older than his 7 years. Will she be there? Vanessa, he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Probably yes, son. But you don't have to look at her if you don't want to. And I'll be there with you, as will Aunt Jo and Mr. Fisher. Once again, Raphael considered the proposal in silence. Then, surprisingly, a determined smile appeared on his face. I'll go, Dad. I'll tell the judge everything, exactly as it happened. Aunt Jo was brave, so I will be too. Bernard felt a lump in his throat at his son's maturity. He pulled him into a tight hug, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness for all the trials the little one had already faced in his short life. On the morning of the hearing, the tension was palpable in the mansion. Josephine, dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and a long-sleeved white blouse, seemed nervous, repeatedly adjusting the bun in which she had tied her grey hair. Raphael, in turn, wore a child's suit that Bernard had bought especially for the occasion. The boy looked smaller and more vulnerable in the formal clothes, but there was a determination in his eyes that moved everyone. "Do I look handsome like a real lawyer, Aunt Jo?" he asked, spinning to display the complete outfit. "The most elegant lawyer I've ever seen," she replied, adjusting the bow tie that completed the ensemble. Upon arriving at the courthouse, they were greeted by Mr. Fisher and led through long, imposing corridors to a reserved meeting room where they would wait until called. The judge agreed to the special format for Raphael's testimony, the lawyer explained. He will speak in a room adjacent to the courtroom, with only the judge, the lawyers, his father, and Mrs. Rhodes present. The accused will be able to watch via a video system, but will not have direct contact with the boy. Raphael listened to the explanations carefully, sitting between Bernard and Josephine, holding both their hands tightly. When they were finally called, a respectful silence fell over the small group that followed the bailiff to the deposition room. Judge Henry Morrison, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, made a point of standing when Raphael entered, an unusual gesture that did not go unnoticed by Bernard. "Good morning, Raphael," the magistrate greeted with a friendly smile. "I understand you have an important story to tell us today. We are here to listen to it with all the respect and attention it deserves." Raphael looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly, and then at Josephine, who gave him an emotional smile. "Judge," the boy began, his voice small but firm, "I know what I'm going to say is very important, so I promise to tell only the truth, just as Aunt Jo always taught me." The judge smiled, visibly touched by the child's sincerity. "That's a very beautiful promise, Raphael, and that's all we need from you today. The truth, exactly as you saw and heard it." With surprising maturity, Raphael recounted the events of that fateful night, how he couldn't sleep and went to seek comfort, how he saw Vanessa in his father's study, opening the safe that was supposed to be secret, how he heard her talking on the phone about incriminating Josephine, and how days later he saw her sneaking into the housekeeper's room with a small purse. When he finished his account, there were tears in the eyes not only of Josephine and Bernard, but also of the judge and even the prosecutor, a woman who seemed carved from stone and who until then had maintained an impassive expression throughout the session. "You were extremely brave, Raphael," the judge praised. "Your testimony is very valuable to our work in delivering justice. Is there anything else you would like to say before we conclude?" Raphael hesitated for a moment, looking at Josephine as if asking permission. She nodded gently, although she didn't know what the boy intended. "Yes, Judge," Raphael replied, straightening his shoulders. "I want to say that Aunt Jo is the most honest person I know. She taught me that we should always tell the truth, even when it's difficult. And I also want to say that," he paused, taking a deep breath, "that even though Vanessa did something very wrong, maybe she needed someone like Aunt Jo in her life to teach her these important things." An astonished silence followed the boy's words. Josephine covered her mouth with her hands, unable to hold back tears at Raphael's unexpected compassion. The judge, visibly moved, needed a few moments to regain her composure. "Your words show a wisdom that many adults never achieve, Raphael. Thank you for sharing them with us today." As they left the deposition room, Raphael surprised everyone again by stopping in front of Josephine and formally extending his hand, as he had seen adults do. Aunt Jo, I promise I will always be your lawyer, even when you're working at the daycare. I promise to always defend the truth, as you taught me. The day of Vanessa's final hearing dawned cloudy in London, as if the sky reflected the gravity of the moment. News of the case had spread, attracting the attention of the local media. At the entrance to the Central Criminal Court, journalists gathered, eager to capture images of businessman Bernard Alcott and his accused ex-wife. Bernard, always discreet in his personal life, decided to enter through a side entrance, protecting Raphael and Josephine from unnecessary exposure. Mr. Paul Fisher awaited them in the main corridor, impeccable in his grey suit, his leather briefcase under his arm containing all the carefully organized evidence. "Good morning, everyone," the lawyer greeted. "The case is being transferred to Courtroom 3. Judge Clara Meadows will preside over the session today, as Judge Henry had a family emergency." "Does this change anything for us?" Bernard asked, concerned about the last-minute change. "Not at all," Paul assured. "Judge Meadows is known for her integrity and meticulous attention to detail. In fact, her participation may be beneficial for us, as she has a history of severity in fraud cases." As they entered the courtroom, Bernard felt an involuntary shiver as he saw Vanessa sitting beside her lawyer. Even after 2 weeks of pre-trial detention, she maintained the elegant posture and calculating gaze that had once enchanted him. She wore a sober pastel-colored outfit that made her appear almost fragile, a carefully constructed image as Bernard now recognized. Their eyes met briefly. Where Bernard expected to see regret, he found only cold disdain, followed by an ironic smile that disturbed him. Instinctively, he placed his hand on Raphael's shoulder, as if to protect him. Judge Clara Meadows entered the room, prompting the traditional "all rise" from the bailiff. Tall, with grey hair cut in a precise bob, the magistrate had a presence that commanded immediate respect. "You may be seated," she said after taking her place. "We are here for the continuation of the criminal proceedings against Vanessa Coast, also known as Vanessa Alcott, accused of aggravated theft, falsification of evidence, slander, defamation, and criminal association. The prosecution may begin its presentation." Prosecutor Deborah Samuels, a black woman of approximately 40 years old, rose confidently. Her competence was legendary in the courtroom, having built a solid career in the fight against white-collar crimes. "Your Honor," she began, "the case before us today is a classic example of premeditation and coldness. The accused, Vanessa Coast, orchestrated an elaborate plan not only to appropriate $5 million and confidential documents belonging to her then-husband, Bernard Alcott, but also to incriminate an innocent employee, Mrs. Josephine Rhodes, who worked honestly for the family for 5 years. For almost an hour, the prosecutor methodically detailed the evidence, the audio recorded by Raphael, the recovered security camera footage showing Vanessa manipulating the system, the money and documents found in her possession, and her history of similar scams in other cities. When it was Josephine's turn to testify, the housekeeper walked to the center of the room with dignity, despite the visible nervousness in her subtly twisting hands. "Mrs. Rhodes," the prosecutor began after the initial formalities, "please tell the court about your relationship with the Alcott family and the events that culminated in your unjust accusation." With a voice initially trembling but gaining firmness throughout the account, Josephine narrated her 5 years of dedicated work, her affection for Raphael, and how she noticed the changes in the house after Vanessa's arrival. She described the episode in which she caught the accused leaving the study late at night, and finally, the devastating moment when she found herself accused of a crime she had not committed. "How did you feel when they found the money in your room?" the prosecutor asked. Josephine took a deep breath, her eyes momentarily welling up. "It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet, counsel. In 5 years, I built a relationship of trust with Mr. Alcott and Raphael. That house was my second family. To see all of it crumble in a matter of minutes." She paused, controlling her emotion, but the worst was seeing the distrust in Mr. Alcott's eyes. That hurt more than the accusation itself. Vanessa's lawyer, Mr. Mark Benson, known for his ability to distort facts and create doubt even in the clearest cases, rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Rhodes," he began with false cordiality, "you mentioned that you worked at the Alcott residence for 5 years. During that period, you had free access to virtually all areas of the house, correct? Yes, sir, Josephine replied cautiously, including Mr. Alcott's study, only for cleaning and only when authorized. But you knew the location of the safe, didn't you? The lawyer insisted. Yes, sir, like all the older staff in the house. Mr. Benson smiled as if he had obtained an important confession. And during those 5 years, you had the opportunity to observe Mr. Alcott opening that safe on several occasions, I presume. Enough time to, shall we say, memorize the combination? The prosecutor immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The lawyer is making insinuations without any basis in the evidence. Objection sustained, the judge declared. Mr. Benson, stick to the proven facts. The lawyer nodded slightly in acknowledgement, but his smile did not diminish. I will withdraw the question. Mrs. Rhodes, you mentioned that you saw Mrs. Vanessa as a threat from the beginning. Wouldn't it be possible that your testimony is colored by this personal antipathy? Josephine remained calm, looking directly at the lawyer. I had no antipathy towards her, counsel. I had concern. They are different things. I saw how she treated young Raphael when his father wasn't looking. I saw how she isolated Mr. Alcott from his closest friends. And above all, I saw her leaving the study that night with a golden purse, right after the sound of the safe being closed. That's not antipathy, sir. Those are facts. For 20 more minutes, the lawyer tried to discredit Josephine's testimony, without success. The housekeeper responded with sincerity and clarity, even to the most tricky questions. When it was Bernard's turn to testify, the businessman recounted how he had met Vanessa, their quick romance and their hasty marriage. He described how she had gradually taken control of the house, alienating him from friends and family, and how he felt blind for not having noticed the signs that now seemed so obvious. Did you ever share the safe combination with your wife? The prosecutor asked. Never, Bernard replied firmly. That safe contained not only money, but extremely confidential documents related to my companies. Only I and my financial director had access. When it was time for Raphael's testimony, the judge ruled that it would be conducted in a private room, as had happened in the preliminary hearing. Vanessa would be allowed to watch via video conference, but could not interact directly with the boy. In the adjacent room, Raphael sat between Bernard and Josephine, visibly nervous but determined. The judge abandoned her usual formality, sitting close to the boy instead of behind the bench. Hello, Raphael, she said with a gentle smile. I know you've been through this before, but I need you to tell again what you saw that night, in your own words. Can you do that? Raphael nodded, straightening up in his chair. His testimony was clear and direct, without the exaggerations that usually colored his everyday stories. He described how he saw Vanessa opening the safe, talking on the phone about incriminating the housekeeper, and later entering Josephine's room with a small purse. And how did you feel when Aunt Jo was accused? The judge asked, carefully observing the boy's reactions. I was very scared, Raphael admitted, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I knew Aunt Jo hadn't done anything wrong, but Vanessa said no one would believe me because I was just a kid. Did she say that to you directly? The judge asked, surprised by this new information. Yes, ma'am. The night she saw me peeking at her in the study. She said if I told anyone, my dad would be so angry that he would send me to a boarding school far from home. Bernard paled upon hearing this revelation. He had never known about this direct threat to his son. Beside him, Josephine held his hand firmly, offering silent support. The judge asked a few more questions, and Raphael answered them all with the same clarity and sincerity. When he finished, the magistrate observed him with evident respect. Raphael, you have shown extraordinary courage today. Thank you for helping us discover the truth. Back in the main courtroom, the tension was palpable. Vanessa, who had watched Raphael's testimony via video conference, had lost some of her composure, her face betraying a mixture of anger and despair. It was then that her lawyer requested a recess to consult with his client. The judge granted 15 minutes, during which Bernard, Josephine, and Raphael waited anxiously in the corridor. She won't get away with it, will she, counsel? Josephine asked lawyer Paul, who had joined them. The evidence is overwhelming, he replied. Raphael's recording, the security cameras, the money and documents found with her, not to mention her history in other cities. Even the best lawyer in the world would have difficulty circumventing all that. When they returned to the room, they were surprised by Vanessa's defeated expression. Her lawyer stood up, nervously adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, after consulting my client, I would like to inform you that she wishes to change her statement. Mrs. Vanessa Coast is willing to admit her guilt in exchange for a plea negotiation." A murmur ran through the room. The judge raised her hand, silencing everyone. "Proceed." "Counsel, my client confesses to having taken the money and documents from Mr. Alcott's safe, as well as having planted part of the money in Mrs. Rhodes's quarters to incriminate her. However, she insists that she acted under coercion from third parties, whose names she is willing to reveal in exchange for a reduction in sentence." The prosecutor stood up, visibly skeptical. "Your Honor, the prosecution is willing to hear the names of these alleged co-conspirators, but we understand that this does not diminish the gravity of the crimes committed by the defendant, especially considering her history of similar actions in other jurisdictions." The judge considered briefly, observing Vanessa with shrewd eyes. "Very well. The court will hear the defendant's confession, but will make no promises regarding sentence reduction at this time. Let us proceed." Vanessa slowly stood up, all her previous elegance and confidence now replaced by a defeated posture. When she began to speak, her voice was devoid of the charm that had once enchanted Bernard. "I confess that I took the money and documents from Bernard's safe, and yes, I put some of the money in Josephine's room to incriminate her. But I didn't act alone. I was hired by Robert Miller, Bernard's main competitor in the renewable energy sector," Vanessa continued, her voice firm despite the evident defeat on her face. "I met Bernard at a charity event, not by chance, but because Robert knew he would be there. The plan was to get close to him, gain his trust, and eventually access privileged information about the merger with Pine Grove Energy Solutions." A murmur of shock ran through the room. Bernard paled, recognizing the name of his biggest business rival. Robert Miller was known for his aggressive tactics in the market, but corporate espionage and theft were something else entirely. "Robert would pay me $2 million for the merger documents," Vanessa continued. "The original plan didn't include stealing money from the safe, but when I saw the opportunity, I decided to secure my own future. As for incriminating Josephine, that was my idea. I needed a convincing scapegoat, and she, being so close to Bernard and having access to the house, was the perfect candidate." The judge watched Vanessa attentively, assessing the sincerity of her words. "And what about the threats to young Raphael? He testified that you intimidated him directly." Vanessa hesitated for the first time, averting her gaze. I didn't mean to scare the child. I panicked when I realized he had seen me in the study. I said things I shouldn't have, yes." "Things you shouldn't have?" Bernard's voice sounded unexpectedly loud in the room. "You threatened my son. You made him believe I would send him away." "Order in the court," the judge intervened, banging her gavel. "Mr. Alcott, I understand your indignation, but you must address the court, not directly the defendant." Bernard nodded, taking a deep breath to regain control. "Forgive me, Your Honor." Turning back to Vanessa, the judge continued, "Do you have anything else to add to your confession?" Vanessa shook her head. "Only that," she looked briefly at Josephine, "I didn't intend for things to get to this point. It was supposed to be a simple scam, information for money. I didn't expect to care." "Care? About whom?" the judge asked, intrigued. "About Bernard," Vanessa replied, her voice almost a whisper. "About Raphael. It wasn't in the plan, but I started to feel something genuine. That's why I hesitated so long before acting. Part of me wanted to give up, to continue that life, to truly be Bernard's wife. But then Robert started pressuring me, threatening to reveal my past if I didn't hand over the documents." Josephine watched Vanessa with a mixture of compassion and skepticism. Could there be any sincerity in that belated confession, or was it just another carefully calculated act to reduce her sentence? Prosecutor Deborah Samuels rose, her face impassive. "Your Honor, regardless of the defendant's alleged feelings, the facts remain. She confessed to theft, falsification of evidence, attempted incrimination of an innocent person, and now corporate espionage. We request that the confession be recorded, but that the sentence consider the gravity of these crimes." The judge nodded. "The confession will be recorded. As for the allegations against Robert Miller, they will be investigated separately, Mr. Fisher, would the victim's defense like to make a statement? Paul Fisher rose elegantly. Yes, Your Honor. Firstly, we request that it be officially recorded that Mrs. Josephine Rhodes is completely innocent of all accusations previously made against her, and that any record in her name be cleared. Furthermore, we ask the court to consider compensation for moral and material damages, both for Mrs. Rhodes and for the Alcott family, especially considering the trauma suffered by minor Raphael. Granted regarding the formal declaration of innocence, the judge replied. As for compensation, it will be determined after the final sentence. Any further statements? To everyone's surprise, Raphael timidly raised his hand. Your Honor, Paul quickly intervened. Young Raphael would like to say something, if the court permits. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Given the exceptional circumstances of this case and the fundamental role young Raphael played in discovering the truth, I will allow it. Raphael, you may speak. The boy stood up, appearing even smaller amidst the adults in the courtroom. His voice, however, sounded clear and confident. Judge, I know Vanessa did very wrong things. She hurt Aunt Jo, she hurt my dad, and she scared me a lot. But something Aunt Jo always taught me is that everyone deserves a second chance. He looked briefly at Josephine, who watched him with tear-filled eyes. I don't know if Vanessa is telling the truth about liking us, but I think everyone can change if they really want to. An emotional silence fell over the room. Even Vanessa seemed genuinely touched by the boy's words. The judge smiled gently at Raphael. Your wisdom and compassion are admirable, young man. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with the court. After the final arguments from the prosecution and defense, the judge announced that she would retire to deliberate, returning with the sentence in an hour. During the recess, Bernard, Josephine, and Raphael waited in a reserved room. Mr. Fisher remained with them, explaining the possible developments. Considering the confession and cooperation in naming accomplices, Vanessa will likely receive a reduced but still significant sentence. The crimes are serious, and her history of similar scams weighs against her. And what about this Robert Miller? Bernard asked, still shaken by the revelation of his competitor's involvement. The police should already be on their way to his company with a search and seizure warrant. If Vanessa's allegations are proven, he will face serious charges of industrial espionage, as well as possible criminal association. When they returned to the courtroom to hear the sentence, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Judge Clara entered with a solemn expression, taking her place behind the bench. After considering all the facts presented, the evidence, and the defendant's confession, this court reaches the following conclusion. Vanessa Coast is found guilty of aggravated theft, falsification of evidence, slander, defamation, industrial espionage, and criminal association. Taking into account her confession and cooperation in identifying accomplices, I sentence the defendant to 6 years of imprisonment under a semi-open prison regime, with the possibility of progression to an open regime after serving 1/3 of the sentence. Subject to good behavior. The judge paused, turning to Josephine. This court officially declares Mrs. Josephine Rhodes innocent of all charges, ordering the complete clearing of any record in her name. Furthermore, the defendant, Vanessa Coast, is ordered to pay $500,000 in moral damages to Mrs. Rhodes, in addition to full reimbursement of the amount stolen from Mr. Bernard Alcott. Finally, the magistrate cast a gentle look at Raphael. This court would like to formally record its recognition of the courage and integrity of young Raphael Alcott, whose determination to defend the truth was fundamental to the resolution of this case. When the session concluded and Vanessa was led away in custody, Josephine finally allowed tears of relief to flow freely. Raphael hugged her tightly, repeating like a mantra, "See, Aunt Jo, I told you I'd be your lawyer." Bernard, watching the scene with restrained emotion, felt an immense weight lifted from his shoulders. Justice had been done, but the path to recovering trust in himself and in others would still be long. 2 weeks after the trial, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Josephine was packing her last belongings into boxes. Her small room at the back of the mansion, which had been her home for 5 years, now seemed strangely empty. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reflections. Raphael entered, followed by Bernard, both carrying a small package wrapped in colorful paper. "A goodbye gift," Raphael explained, extending the package with a shy smile. Josephine opened the wrapping carefully, revealing a carved wooden frame. Inside, a recent photo of the three of them, Josephine, Bernard and Raphael, sitting in the mansion garden, genuine smiles lighting their faces. "So you never forget that you will always be part of our family," Bernard said, his voice choked with emotion. "How could I forget?" Josephine replied, hugging the photo to her chest. "You are etched in my heart." Raphael then pulled a second, smaller package from behind his back. "This one's just mine," he announced proudly. "I made it specially for you, Aunt Jo." Inside the small box, Josephine found a small handmade brooch, clearly crafted by Raphael's skillful hands. It was a golden star with the word lawyer painted in the center. "Because you always defend what's right," the boy explained, "even when no one believes you." Josephine couldn't hold back her tears as she pinned the brooch to her blouse, exactly over her heart. The farewell was painful, but necessary. Bernard had insisted on buying a small apartment for Josephine in the same neighborhood as the municipal daycare. "Just compensation for everything you went through," he had argued when she tried to refuse. Furthermore, he ensured that Raphael would visit her regularly. "Every Sunday," the boy solemnly promised, "and I'll bring my homework for you to help me with." 6 months passed. Josephine's life had taken a completely new turn. The work at the daycare brought a different kind of satisfaction than she had felt at the Alcott mansion. Caring for dozens of children was exhausting, but deeply rewarding. Her small apartment, simply but very cozily decorated, had become a tranquil refuge. The photo with Bernard and Raphael occupied a prominent place on the living room shelf, along with the special brooch, which Josephine carefully kept in a velvet box, taking it out only on special occasions. As promised, Raphael visited her every Sunday, often accompanied by Bernard. The boy told her about school, about his new friends, about his dreams, and always, inevitably, the conversation would turn back to the events that had changed their lives. "Did you know Dad is helping people who are unjustly accused, like you, Aunt Jo?" Raphael revealed on one of these visits, proud of his father. "He even started a foundation." It was true. Deeply impacted by the experience, Bernard had established the Transparent Justice Foundation, dedicated to offering free legal support to unjustly accused individuals who lacked the means to adequately defend themselves. And do you know who he hired as legal director? Mr. Fisher. And the foundation has already helped 3 people prove they were innocent. Josephine smiled, genuinely happy to see something so positive emerge from such a painful experience. "Your father always had a good heart," she commented, serving more passion fruit juice to the boy. "He just needed to find the right path." As for Vanessa, news was scarce. According to Mr. Fisher, who kept Bernard informed, she was serving her sentence and, surprisingly, showing signs of genuine remorse. She had started studying law in prison and was actively participating in rehabilitation programs. Robert Miller, in turn, faced a long process for industrial espionage and criminal association. His company had suffered a devastating blow with the scandal, losing important contracts and market value. On a particularly significant Sunday afternoon, exactly 1 year after the trial, Bernard arrived at Josephine's door with a different expression on his face. He seemed nervous, almost shy, very different from the confident businessman she had known for so many years. "Raphael stayed at his friend's house today," he explained. "I thought we could talk. Just the 2 of us." Josephine prepared strong coffee as she knew he liked it, and they sat on the small balcony overlooking a community garden. "There's something I'd like to propose to you." "Josephine," Bernard began after a few minutes of casual conversation, "the foundation is growing. We're opening a support center for families of unjustly accused people. We need someone to coordinate it, someone who understands firsthand what these families are going through." Josephine observed him over her coffee cup, intrigued. "And you're offering me this position?" "Please, after everything we've been through, I think you can just call me Bernard," he smiled. "And yes, I'm offering you the position. You have exactly the experience and sensitivity needed. Besides," he hesitated for a moment, "Raphael misses you very much. The house has never been the same without you." Josephine felt her heart race. The proposal was tempting. She loved her work with the children at the daycare, but the opportunity to help people who were going through the same thing she had faced combined with the possibility of being closer to Raphael. "You don't have to answer now," Bernard continued, noticing her hesitation. "Think it over carefully. The position will be waiting for you." When he stood to leave, he surprised Josephine with an unexpected gesture, a warm hug, different from the formal greetings that had always characterized their relationship. "Thank you, Josephine," he murmured, "for never giving up, for believing in us even when we doubted ourselves." 2 weeks later, Josephine accepted the proposal. Her first day as coordinator of support at the Transparent Justice Foundation coincided with Raphael's 9th birthday. The boy, now taller and with the same luminous smile, received the news as the best gift he could get. "I knew you'd come back, Aunt Jo." "I knew it." The celebration was held in the Alcott Mansion garden, much simpler and more welcoming than the ostentatious parties Vanessa had organized in the past. Close friends, staff from the house and the foundation gathered to celebrate not only Raphael's birthday, but also the beginning of this new phase. During his thank you speech, Raphael surprised everyone by climbing onto the small improvised stage, taking the microphone from his father's hands. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," he began with surprising confidence for his age. "But most of all, I want to thank Aunt Jo, who taught me that justice lives within us. One day when I'm a real lawyer, I want to be just like her. Someone who never stops believing in the truth, even when it seems impossible." Josephine, moved, watched the boy with maternal pride. Of all the twists and turns life had reserved for her, leaving Alabama young, years of hard work in London, the injustice suffered, and finally, redemption. Nothing compared to the joy of seeing that small seed of integrity flourish in Raphael. 5 years later, the Transparent Justice Foundation had become a national reference with branches in 4 states. Raphael, now a 14-year-old teenager, actively volunteered on weekends, firmly determined to pursue a legal career. When you say you want to be a lawyer just like Aunt Jo, you know she's not a formally trained lawyer, right? Bernard once joked as they watched Josephine coordinating a family support group. "I know, Dad," Raphael replied with a wise smile. "But she has what many trained lawyers don't, the courage to defend the truth, even when no one else believes her." That's what I meant. On a sunny Sunday in January, the foundation held its first national conference, bringing together jurists, activists, and people who had been helped by the organization. The event, held in a packed auditorium in central London, was an important milestone for the work they had developed. After Bernard's moving speech about how a traumatic experience had transformed into a life purpose, it was Josephine's turn to take the stage. Dressed simply, but with the dignity that had always characterized her, she adjusted the microphone, visibly nervous about speaking to so many people. In the audience, Raphael gave her a thumbs up in support, making her smile. "My name is Josephine Rhodes," she began, her voice gaining firmness with each word. "I am an Alabaman by birth, a Londoner by choice, and for a few terrible days 6 years ago, I was unjustly accused of a crime I did not commit." The audience listened in respectful silence. "In those dark days, I lost almost everything. My job, my reputation, my freedom. But one thing they couldn't take from me, the certainty of my own truth. And it was that certainty, along with the extraordinary courage of a 7-year-old boy, that saved me." Josephine paused, searching for Raphael with her gaze. "Today, when I receive desperate families in our support center, I see in their eyes the same fear I felt. And I tell them what I learned from my own experience. The truth can be stifled, hidden, distorted, but never completely erased. It always finds a way to come to light." Upon concluding her speech, Josephine received a standing ovation. Among the many hands that rose in approval, one in particular caught her attention. Raphael, now almost as tall as Bernard, applauded with tears in his eyes, displaying on his shirt the small golden brooch with the word lawyer that he had made for her years ago. At that moment, looking at the boy who had saved her with his pure courage, and at the man who had the humility to recognize his mistake and transform it into a force for good, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that the circle was finally closing. The injustice she had suffered could never be completely erased from her memory, but it had been transformed into something greater than herself, a mission, a purpose, a new family, built not by blood ties, but by the unbreakable force of truth. And when Raphael went up to the stage to hug her, whispering in her ear, "I told you I'd be your lawyer forever," Josephine knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter the challenges the future might bring, justice, the kind that lives within each one, would always find its way. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Josephine, Bernard, and little Raphael has touched your hearts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and hearing what you thought of this emotional journey of courage, truth, and redemption.